Hello all you bonsai lovers out there in YouTube land. This is Jason Schley at Schley's Bonsai and Supplies. Today I wanted to talk about our native hackberry or sugarberry. It is a very common tree out here in Central Florida. It doesn't grow down in South Florida because it does need to go dormant, although I think it grows down to Fort Lauderdale. I could be mistaken, but I've seen it below Orlando and into Vero Beach. This one was collected, actually grown and collected out of my backyard when I moved a few years back. One of my better trees. Hackberries are a variety that sometimes will get a lot of growth, warty growth on the trunk. Sometimes it'll be smooth. There's like a little bit of variance to that. Here's some warty growth, and sometimes it'll be very pronounced. They look a lot like an elm, although their growth habit is different. I don't like to wire them into flat pads because it's deciduous. Flat trees are not, deciduous trees shouldn't look like a pine. You can see this is very deep, and a lot of it is growing up and out into it, and it has a rounded top which will develop more and more round as the tree develops. This has only been in a bonsai pot for 3 years, but it was collected 10 years ago. But this is a good example of a larger, nice collected piece. Wanted to show you some older ones as well. These are also collected. This one is a friend of mine's who also is our guest artist, named Mike Rogers. This is a fantastic tree. Not nearly as large of a trunk, but they don't have to have a large trunk to be a fantastic tree. Let me move some of this out of the way so you can really see it. But this is a good bonsai tree that has a lot of ramification and time in it. As a matter of fact, it has considerably more time in it than the hackberry that you just saw. But it is a really nice piece. And you can see they do wire up nicely. This tree's been wired multiple times and directionally pruned throughout its life. Hackberries, typically here in Florida, grow a little higher than bald cypresses, little higher in elevation. They don't grow in swamps, but they also grow quite a bit moisture areas than our pines do. A lot of our sand pines will grow in a higher elevation where it's a sandy area, where the hackberries are in an area where it likes good drainage, but also a lot of moisture in and around the roots. Sorry, we're gonna go through the woods here to get to my stock trees. A couple of the issues with hackberry. One is they do rot. The wood rots. It's a lot more dense than our Acer rubrum, our native red maple, but it does rot faster than an elm. The deadwood is very hard. If you treat it, it'll last a long time, but you can also make some interesting hollows. This is another hackberry it's a piece of stock here at our nursery, but this was collected 4 years ago, and it's been cut back and shaped. I say collected, but it was worked in the ground for a season. These are actually grown. This is the Chinese hackberry, slightly different than our native hackberry, which is this one. These are all grown out in the backyard and then collected when I moved. But you can see that they're just still stock. They're just cut to their initial line. They have a few years to go, but they are very healthy, very vigorous. Some of the problems that hackberry has, one is it gets a gall, especially if it's trimmed back and kept really dense. There's a gall, but it's easy to take care of. You just hit it with an insecticide because the gall is actually caused by a little beetle. These are some hackberries that I had in my backyard that need to be cut. refinement work and something on there, because like I said, they do tend to rot away to make interesting hollows. But you can also, if you're working on the deadwood, you want to protect it. This is a raft, and believe it or not, the very first one that I showed you, the great big one, this was actually a piece of the root that I left in the ground when I collected out of my backyard, and it sprouted. So it was left to grow for 4 years, and when I moved out, I cut it back all the way down to a stump. You can see the large cuts that I did right here, and they're actually really spongy now and will be completely hollowed out and cleaned up till we get to nice dense wood and treated. Probably have some hollows, but it's an interesting one. It's so hard to see, especially on video, but there's a lot to going for it. It has some hollows in there and some, just some interesting things happening. This is another piece of that same root cutting that, again, it was just had so much character I just couldn't leave it, so I collected it. Hackberries also root from, obviously from root cuttings, but you can have whole stumps put in a pot and they'll root. That's exactly what these are. Were just little heavy root cuttings that were put in a pot after I did some heavy cutting on a tree to put it in a bonsai pot, and they've all sprouted. In 4 or 5 years, they'll be fantastic. I do collect little seedlings. They sprout all over the place. Right here, you can see they get that interesting movement from being a seedling. You could also artificially create that with wire, I'm sure. Here's a couple big giant stumps that are just basically cut root cuttings that require a few more years. A lot of sections of this will rot by the time it really starts growing, but again, it could add a lot of character and interest. Some of the other problems with hackberry is they get what we call whitefly. They're related to scale. Usually I'll see them really heavily in the fall. You can spray with an oil, typically an hour before dark. Neem oil works really well. Just make sure you get the under sections of the leaves. Again, they get that gall. I don't really see any. Well, here's some. These were sprayed, but you can kind of see a little bit of remnants because I haven't trimmed these yet, because we're actually going to be weeding this table and trimming them back. I like to let them grow long to build some thickness in the branching, and then cut them. But before I sprayed, I cut a lot of them off, but that's what it looks like, the gall. You want to be careful of that. Cut it out as soon as you can and treat for it, because it'll spread. These are some of the Chinese hackberries that I have. Again, these were grown in raised beds specifically for workshop material. These are going to be great, but I really think our native hackberry is just as good, if not a little better, just because it grows here natively, and it's just a fantastic tree. I mean, you look at this piece of stock. I mean, it's in these hackberries that I think needs to be more utilized. And just to show you, these are the leaves when they're not trimmed. I mean, they get big. That's what they look like out in our landscape. But if you look, the lower section was trimmed, much smaller, and they get tiny, just like a Chinese elm. They get really tiny. They do like to grow their roots all season quite vigorously, so you have to repot them just like you would any deciduous tree on an annual basis on a smaller to medium-sized tree. The larger ones I usually repot every 3 to 5 years. And by the 5th year, this big one is pretty full of roots, but I like to let them get growing for a few years longer, because it takes 2 years for the roots to really get in the pot and for it to really take off. This one hasn't been repotted for 2 years. This is the 3rd year, and this year it is just growing gangbusters. Next year I'll check the roots, and according to the way it's been growing, it probably won't be bare root or completely root bound by next winter. So I'll probably wait till 12-14, the winter of 12-13, or the early spring of 12-14 to repot it. And at that point it'll stay in this pot. I think it's a great pot for this tree, and it adds to it. It doesn't detract. Traditionally we put deciduous trees in glazed containers, but this unglazed container is nice. It has a little scene on it. It's a CBI pottery pot from China. It's not a bad pot for this tree. Thank you very much, everybody. This is your discussion on our native hackberry. Thanks. If you have any questions or comments, please send me a message, or if you like it, please like our page and share it. Thanks. Bye.